Hey, I'm Haley.
And I'm Debbie. And we're
Extension in the Kitchen. Welcome back to Extension in the Kitchen. We are so excited to have Debbie here today. She is our area specialized agent in food safety at NC State University, and she is going to be helping me today with pressure canning. So thank you for joining us.
It's great to be here.
Yay.
Thank you for having me.
We are going to be pressure canning green beans today. This is a recipe from the National Center of Home Food Preservation, which is a recommended website, right?
Excellent resource.
Yes.
Excellent resource.
So the first thing that we need to do is have the proper equipment. So what's some equipment that we could use for pressure canning?
Okay, well, whenever canning meat, vegetables, your low acid foods, you want to pressure can. So we have a variety of pressure canners back here to choose from. This is a dial gauge pressure canner. It's called a dial gauge because it has a dial. This is your weight to vent with. This is a weighted gauge pressure canner. Instead of a dial, your weights are going to be 5, 10, or 15 pounds of pressure. And it also serves as your pressure regulator. And then we have another over here of a weighted gauge pressure canner, but this has rings. So you have 5, 10, and 15 pounds of pressure. Without the rings, it's 5 pounds. You add a ring, 10, and another ring, 15. But we're going to be canning at 10 pounds of pressure today, so we only need to have one ring.
Yeah, so as you go up in altitude, the PSI changes, right? So you increase that as you go up in altitude to add additional weight.
Which is going to push up the temperature, because as you go higher in altitude, the air pressure is lower, water boils at a lower temperature. But to make sure we take care of pathogens that might be able to harm us, we have to stick with that temperature.
Awesome.
So that's why you use more weight, so that you can get the correct temperature.
Awesome. So again, we are, for our weighted gauge, going to be canning with 10 pounds. If we were going to be using the dial gauge today, we would actually can at 11 PSI. So let's get started on this awesome recipe. We are going to be taking out these hot jars. Move this out of the way. All right, and me and Debbie are just going to be doing this together. So this is our jar lifter to make it easy to get those jars out of that hot water. And our recipe gives us the option to do either a raw pack or a hot pack. And with your hot pack, you actually heat the food up prior to putting it in the jar. And with some foods, this is a great thing to do because you're cooking out some of that oxygen, right? Mm-hmm. Which allows for you to utilize more of that jar space. Because as you're processing, it kind of cooks down that food. And so you actually can end up with extra space in the jar that you're not using, right?
You have vegetables that are floating in the jar. So since we're doing a raw pack, we need to pack these green beans into the jar tightly, but remembering for this recipe, you need 1 inch of headspace. So we're going to pack it in there, and we're going to measure our headspace.
So we're going to use our jar funnel, or, not whatever you're more comfortable with. I tend to miss my jar pretty easily, so I'm going to use my jar funnel. And these beans have already been trimmed, and we tried to remove as much of those spots that we can, because we want some pretty canned green beans. So we're gonna pack them in there really nice.
And Haley, you're gonna do salt-free, right?
I'm doing salt-free. In
Okay.
this recipe, it is optional to use salt. You do want to use canning salt, and that's because the canning salt doesn't have iodine, correct?
No or free flow agent in it.
Okay.
So this way you don't get a cloudy liquid.
Yes.
If you use regular table salt, you might have either cloudiness or sedimentation inside of your jar. So stick with canning salt. It works great every time.
So since you're using that, you want
I need
some
one.
measuring spoons.
And for this, I have a pint jar, so I'm going to use a half teaspoon of salt.
And I'm also going to get us, all right, again for this recipe, we're making sure that we have 1 inch of headspace. So when you're packing those green beans in, make sure that you leave 1 inch from that rim of your jar to where the green beans start. And that goes with the liquid too.
Let's see what we have. When you pack your jar, you want to run a wand around the sides to dislodge any air bubbles. We're going to push these down and then measure.
All right, I'm doing that
Yeah.
step now too.
Yep, and I need to scoop out some of my green beans. I've got too many.
Yes, there. There's some smaller spoons over here.
Oh, excellent.
There you go.
I might actually use this spoon to pack them down and just remove water. Yep.
I just noticed we're out of paper towels. Are napkins okay to wipe the rim of our jars?
Yes, napkins work perfectly.
Okay. Get you some of that.
Excellent.
All
There
right.
we go.
So let me recheck my headspace here.
And I will do the same. Excellent.
All right.
Always follow the manufacturer's directions for your lids. So for these ball lids, they are prepared and ready to go. And when you put the lid on, you finger tighten. So you're only going to use your fingertips. Do not get one of those little rubber gaskets or
Yeah.
anything. Use your whole hand. Just fingertip tight is as far as you need to go.
Yeah. And I noticed they have tools now to help you tighten the lid.
And you don't want to do that.
Yeah.
What happens when it's finger tightened, there's enough space for air to escape without allowing liquid to escape. But when you tighten it down so completely that air won't even escape, that's how you have bulging lids. So if you ever notice, oh, my lids are buckled, you've probably tightened your lid.
And Debbie, going back to the headspace, So again, we talked about like the headspace being from the top to where the liquid or the food starts. So why is that inch so important for?
Okay, for this particular recipe, for the amount of time that we're processing, we're going to process and drive that air out. So for vegetables such as green beans, 1 inch of headspace will give you enough room. There may be expansion of the vegetable, and you won't have vegetables or produce pushing on the bottom of the lid. Now, you have other items where it might be 1/2 inch headspace. Or for in the case of jams and jellies, you only need 1/4 inch because it doesn't swell as much.
Okay,
So
makes
always
sense,
follow the headspace. You don't want too little, or you could have food pushing on the bottom of the lid, or even escaping, pushing out from under the lid. If you have too much airspace, your processing time might not drive all the air out. And we need all of the air out of this jar
For it to be safe.
for it to be safe. Correct.
Awesome. All right, so now I think we're good to go ahead and put this in our canners. So, yeah, let's do it.
Okay.
So we're gonna take it right over here and stick it into our pressure canner.
And remember, if you're doing raw pack, you want to put your jars into warm water and bring your canner up to temperature. Now, if we had done a hot pack where we had hot vegetables or hot produce going into hot jars, then we can put it into hot water. But because we don't want heat shock where there's one temperature inside the jar, another temperature outside of the jar, which might cause the jar to fail, break on you.
And something you might can't see from here is that we already have some water in this. One of the main differences, other than the difference in temperature between your water bath canner and your pressure canner, is the amount of water that you actually put in your canner. So with water bath, we cover those jars completely by your water because you want the temperature of the water, the boiling water, to be what kills off those pathogens. And with our pressure canner, it's going to be the heat of the steam that is what kills off our pathogens. And our main pathogen of concern is Clostridium botulinum, which causes botulism,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And that, while it's not a very highly occurring sickness, it is super fatal, and that's why we want to make sure that you properly can your green beans, your vegetables, your meats, and so on. Any of your low acid foods. So that's what we're starting with today. We've got 2 to 3 inches of water in our pressure canner before we add our canned foods in. All right.
Okay.
So we're just going to continue on filling up our jars. All right. All right, again, leaving that 1 inch of headspace.
That looks good. Oh, I almost forgot my salt.
We're not adding in anything fancy. This is just boiling water. Whoop. A little bit out. Again, don't forget to remove those air bubbles.
Haley, how many times have you canned green beans?
Probably not as many times as you have. So Debbie was actually a Family and Consumer Sciences agent. In which county, Debbie? In Johnston?
I was in Johnston County for 17 and a half years,
17 and
and
a half.
then Wilson County for another 2 years. I had both counties. So 19 and a half years as an FCS agent, and I loved it.
It is a fun job.
It is a fun job.
I was just telling some folks that were in my canning class yesterday about how surprised people are when I tell them I can and cook for a living. They're like, you get paid to do that? Wow.
That's what makes it a great job.
Exactly. All right, so put that lid on, finger tight. Ooh,
Perfect.
I already have space that I could have used. That's okay. So something else that's important to know about canning is pH. So 4.6 is kind of that magic number in canning that we teach people about, because 4.6 differentiates between our high acid and our low acid foods. So if it is below 4.6, that means it's going to be a high acid food. So our foods that have an acidity between 0 to 4.6 are considered low acid, and so that means that you can use a water bath canner to safely preserve
Consider
them.
high acid.
Oh, high acid. See, thank you. They're high acid, so you can use a water bath canner to preserve them. Now, if we are above that 4.6, or yes, 4.6 and up in acidity, then we will want to use our pressure canner to properly can them.
And right now we're using a tested recipe, and a tested recipe means that it's been validated. We know that if we can these green beans according to the National Center of Home Food Preservation's recipe for green beans, it will be a safe product to consume. Now, you may find recipes that look really, really great and you would like to use them, but they're not tested. A recommendation is compare that recipe to a tested one. And if they align, then you can use that recipe. If it's off, make the adjustments and align it to a tested recipe so that you know this is something safe for you and your family to consume.
Now, yesterday when I opened up this brand new package of jars, as I was taking them apart, I noticed that one of the brand new lids was already dented. And so that's another thing to make sure you check on as you're using new jars, as you're reusing old jars or old screw bands. You want to make sure that they aren't dented, that they aren't cracked, they don't have any nicks on them, because this could prevent the proper seal from occurring.
Now, Haley stated that in a pressure canner, you're creating a steam environment. You do not cover your jars with water. You only need 2 to 3 inches. So if you notice, as you're placing jars into the canner, you have too much water, it's simple. Just dip it out. You want that last jar?
Let's do it.
Oh, there's 2 more. Okay.
We might be able to fit 2 more. Today we do have the wide mouth jars, which sometimes you might find you don't have quite enough room to fit that last jar in there.
Depends on your canner, but
That's true.
wide mouth do take up more space. Where did you get your green beans, Haley?
So these green beans were from our agriculture agent here in Stanley County, his farm. He actually picked these for us and donated them to our class. So we are very fortunate to have someone right here that was able to do that for us,
Yeah.
to give us a fresh product to use. And that brings me to another good point, is that when you're canning, you do want to use fresh and high quality foods. That's gonna give you a better canned product.
Yes.
And a question I was asked yesterday was, you know, could you use?
You know what? I'm doing this. I'm going to look for a little dish.
What do you need?
This
Okay.
cup will work perfectly.
But a question I was asked yesterday was if you could use a low quality or not fresh food to can. And my response was that you could safely, for sure, can something that wasn't the freshest or, you know, whatever, but it's not going to result in the best quality canned
Right.
food.
Nothing magic happens in this jar. What you put in will be what you pull out later. So you want high quality produce, because if you're going to go through all of this effort to can, you want something really nice that you want to share with your family, with friends.
Absolutely. Okay, we'll put this one in, see if we have room for one more. I don't think we're going to, Debbie.
Oh, are we full? All right.
Let's see. I'll try to squeeze them over.
Let's see. It's okay. Another batch. Oh, oh no, we have room for one more. Excellent.
Perfect. Awesome. So in this canner we got 9 pint jars, which is
Yes.
pretty common. And if we were using quarts, we would probably only get 7 in there.
Yes. Slightly larger jars.
Yeah.
All right.
So here's an example of our quart size jar. Other recommended sizes are jelly jars, which are half pints.
But follow your recipe. There are going to be recommendations for quart size, pint size, half pint, depending on your recipe. So if you have a recipe that gives you processing times for a specific type jar and you do not have a processing time for another type, it could be safety-wise, there are no tested recipes for processing half-gallon size for green beans. But apple juice, yes, you can process apple juice in the half-gallon size. Again, when you go down in size, you can process, and the large one would be a safety issue. For the smaller sizes, you can process using the same processing time for a half pint as you would for a full pint, but now you have over-processing that's going to occur because the volume is so much smaller, so that's a quality issue. So the best thing for you to do, follow the recipe.
The tested recipe.
Yes, the tested recipe. Don't make adjustments, don't skip, don't add, follow the recipe.
Awesome. So what are we going to do next, Miss Debbie?
We're going to let this come to a boil. Once it comes to a boil, we'll put the lid on and we'll share the next step.
Awesome. Okay, so we are now boiling and we are going to now add our lid onto our pressure canner so that we can then vent our canner for 10 minutes. So will you add that and I'll talk about venting. So what we do when we vent, it literally just means we're going to leave our vent open. We're going to wait to add our weight. And the reason we're doing this is so that we can build our steam inside of our canner. Because as we mentioned, the difference between our water bath and our pressure is our pressure actually reaches a temperature of 240 degrees Fahrenheit to kill off our pathogens. And in order to reach 240, we have to do this by having steam in our canner. So we are going to vent out the air from our canner to build up the steam so we can then reach our desired heat.
You don't start your 10-minute time for venting until you see a nice column, a strong column of steam coming from your canner, because you want a pure steam environment. So in order to create that pure steam environment, the air has to be driven out of the canner first. Seeing if we, and sometimes it helps if you have something dark behind and you can see the steam. Do you see a column? Not yet. Not yet.
Not quite yet.
Not quite. Now we have a strong column of steam, and before we place our weight on, we're going to vent this canner for 10 minutes.
All right, guys, we have been venting now for 10 minutes. So we are going to add our 10-pound weight onto our canner, and we are going to allow our pressure to build. And once we have a steady rock with our weight, we will be able to start timing our processing time.
Now, it takes less energy to maintain temperature than it does to achieve temperature. So once this starts rocking, we're actually going to lower it a bit. I wanted to point out some features to the canner. Back here, we have a lock. So once the pressure has risen sufficiently where it would be dangerous to open this lid, that pressure is going to cause the lock to engage to keep anyone from opening the canner while it's under pressure. Steam burns are really bad. We also have here the safety plug. If for any reason the canner goes over pressure, you're not going to have the case of the lid exploding or your canner. You know, you've probably heard all kinds of horror stories. What will happen, this safety plug will dislodge. It's going to shoot out of there and release the pressure inside of your canner.
Now we have a steady rock with our 10-pound weight, and so we can start our processing time of 20 minutes. So it's going to be 20 minutes per pint. If you are doing quart-sized jars, that's going to be 25 minutes. But again, you want to follow the instructions in your recommended recipe.
So we are finished. Processing time is over. So we are going to turn off the eye, and we're going to leave this alone. Once canning is completed, the time is completed, you don't do anything to rush your canner, you don't move anything, don't do anything to cool it down. This is part of the processing. So we're gonna let this drop on its own accord. We know the pressure has dropped when that lock drops down. I did want to point out, you might have noticed we are canning on a coil top instead of this really nice flat top. Some flat top ranges do not allow for canning, so always follow your manufacturer's directions. Some will let you can, but keep in mind that when you're canning, you have a pot that's full of water, full of jars of food with a tremendous amount of heat. So that can stress these flat top ranges. So make sure, call the manufacturer, look in your book. If you've purchased a new one and you still have the book, it will let you know whether or not you can can on this surface.
All right, we have pressured our green beans down for 20 minutes, which is significant time for us to have killed off these pathogens. And we can now remove our weights.
We've waited 20 minutes. When you remove your weight, wait 2 minutes and then open up your canner. Okay, we've waited 2 minutes. We're ready to open our canner. Always open away from yourself so that first blast of steam, you don't get that in your face. And when you remove your jars, you're going to put them on a cushioned surface. And you'll notice that's why some people hot pack, because with hot pack, we could have gotten even more green beans into our jars. During processing, the green beans are going to cook and they'll shrink. So that's why we have that little gap at the bottom. But these still look really good. You want these in a draft-free place. Give some space. Don't put them to cool too closely together. You want to leave some space between them. And you'll notice that these are still processing. See the bubbles that are going on? So you should not disturb them. Don't pick it up. Leave these are pressure can. So you're gonna leave these for 24 hours. Now, if you notice, sometimes once you pull them right out of the canner, they start sealing. With these, none have sealed yet. We haven't heard any popping, but if at 24 hours you've noticed that you have jars that have not sealed, you can open up the jars, empty the contents into a pot, reheat them, refill, get a clean jar, a new lid, because these lids are one use only. The bands you can use over and over again, but the lids are one use only. Put in a clean jar, reseal, and reprocess. Now, reprocessed green beans are probably going to not be of the highest quality. So if you've noticed after 24 hours that they have not sealed, just stick them in the fridge and eat them within a few days. That's an alternative. But these look wonderful. After 24 hours, if you've noticed, they're all sealed. You're going to remove the bands, make sure your jars are clean, just wipe them off with a cloth, and then you're going to store them. When canning, can what you're going to use within a year. That's for best quality.
Thanks for joining us on Extension in the Kitchen. And remember, for any information on proper home food preservation, contact your local Cooperative Extension office.